Imagine the entire global economy is resting on a massive, creaking wooden seesaw. On one side of this seesaw, a tiny 21-mile stretch of ocean water in the Middle East is threatening to skyrocket the cost of absolutely everything you buy. On the exact opposite side, an absolute tidal wave of cheap electric power from the East is quietly preparing to make traditional oil completely obsolete. The global energy market is tearing itself in two right in front of our eyes, and the side that ultimately wins. This brutal tug of war will dictate global wealth for the next 50 years. Hello, this is Warm Insight. Today, we're going to talk about the hidden geopolitical tensions, controlling your gas prices, China's massive clean energy surge, and how smart money is playing this historic shift. Leaving a like and subscribing is a huge help to us. Let us dive deep into the first side of our seesaw, the extreme geopolitical instability in the Middle East, and something financial experts call the risk premium. To truly understand why your local gas prices fluctuate so wildly, you have to look at a map and find the Strait of Hormuz. This is a very narrow V-shaped waterway located between Oman and Iran. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Now, why does this tiny slice of ocean matter to your wallet? Because roughly 20% of all the petroleum consumed in the entire world passes through this specific stretch of water every single day. We are talking about over 20 million barrels of oil. Picture a line of massive supertankers, ships so large you could fit 3 football fields on their decks, slowly navigating through a channel that is only 2 miles wide for inbound and outbound traffic. It is the ultimate geographic choke point. If you think about the global economy as a human body, the Strait of Hormuz is the main artery pumping blood to the heart. Now imagine someone is holding a razor blade right next to that artery. That is the current geopolitical reality. When diplomats stall their negotiations, or when military ships aggressively patrol these waters, the global market panics. This panic creates what economists call a risk premium. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine you live in a quiet neighborhood, and you pay $50 a month for home insurance. Suddenly, you hear a news report that a team of highly organized burglars is operating in your exact zip code. Even if your house has not been robbed yet, you might rush out and buy an expensive security system, or the insurance company might suddenly double your monthly rate just because the danger is nearby. That extra money you are paying is a risk premium. You are paying for the fear of what might happen. In the oil market, buyers are so terrified that a war might block the Strait of Hormuz that they are willing to pay much higher prices today just to secure their oil supply. This fear alone can push crude oil prices up by $5, $10, or even $15 a barrel, even if not a single drop of oil has actually been stopped. But to understand the true danger of this choke point, we have to look back at history. We have to look at the 1970s and the 1980s. In 1973, a coalition of Arab states launched a sudden attack on Israel, starting the Yom Kippur War. The United States supported Israel. In retaliation, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries decided to punish the United States and its allies by imposing an oil embargo. They simply stopped selling them oil. The results were absolutely catastrophic for the average person. Gas prices quadrupled almost overnight. People had to wait in lines, stretching for blocks just to put a few gallons in their cars. The government even had to implement rationing systems based on license plate numbers. It caused a massive global recession and showed the world how incredibly dangerous it is to rely on one unstable region for your basic survival. Then, just a decade later in the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War broke out. This led to something called the Tanker War. Both sides realized that the best way to hurt their enemy was to destroy their wealth, and their wealth was floating right there in the Persian Gulf. They began firing advanced anti-ship missiles at unarmed commercial oil tankers. Imagine sitting on a floating bomb, carrying millions of gallons of highly flammable liquid, and watching a military missile streak toward you across the sky. Hundreds of ships were attacked. Insurance rates for ships entering the Gulf skyrocketed by hundreds of % in a matter of days. The United States Navy eventually had to step in and physically escort these private oil tankers just to keep the global economy from collapsing. So when you see news today about stalled diplomacy between the United States and Iran, or military skirmishes near the Red Sea, the people buying and selling millions of barrels of oil are remembering the 1970s and the 1980s. They are terrified of history repeating itself. and they are passing that terror directly on to you every time you fill up your car. But the story gets even more complicated. When we look at the shadow economy of oil, our modern world has a deeply hidden, underground pipeline for sanctioned crude oil, and it heavily involves Chinese refiners. You see, the United States has placed severe economic sanctions on several nations, making it illegal for Western companies to buy their oil. But oil is like water. If you block its path, it will always find a crack to seep through. This brings us to the fascinating world of the dark fleet and teapot refineries. When a country cannot legally sell its oil, it uses a dark fleet of aging, unregistered and uninsured oil tankers. These ghost ships physically turn off their tracking transponders, so they vanish from global radar systems. Under the cover of darkness in the middle of the ocean, these massive ships pull up right next to each other and pump millions of gallons of oil from one ship to another. This is called a ship-to-ship transfer. It is incredibly dangerous and highly illegal, but it washes the origin of the oil. From there, this heavily discounted secret oil often makes its way to China. But it does not usually go to the massive state-owned energy corporations. It goes to smaller independent refining companies, located mostly in the Shandong province. These independent operations are nicknamed teapot refineries. Imagine the mainstream oil market as a massive, heavily regulated corporate grocery store chain. Teapot refineries are like a network of underground, back alley speakeasies that only deal in cash and ask no questions. Because they buy this sanctioned oil at a massive discount, they can produce gasoline and plastics much cheaper than anyone else. But here is the catch. When the United States cracks down and places new sanctions directly on these specific Chinese teapot refiners, it causes sudden localized earthquakes in the market. Ships get stranded at sea. Payments freeze. The supply of refined petrochemicals suddenly drops, which makes the prices of everything from plastic bottles to tires shoot up unexpectedly. This invisible tug of war in the shadows creates extreme volatility. Now let us shift our focus from the supply of energy to the absolute explosion of demand, specifically looking at the nation of India. India is currently experiencing record high power demand, and a massive part of this is driven by brutal, unprecedented heat waves. When we talk about global economics, we often forget that human physical survival is the ultimate market driver. When temperatures soar above 110 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time, electricity is no longer a luxury. It becomes a matter of life and death. The Indian power grid is one of the largest and most complex machines ever built by human beings, but it is under immense stress. Imagine you are trying to run a full marathon while trapped inside a blazing hot sauna, and the only water you have to drink is boiling hot. That is what the electrical grid is experiencing, as millions upon millions of air conditioning units and industrial cooling systems are turned on simultaneously. The demand for power skyrockets. To meet this massive, sudden spike in demand, India has to burn more fuel. While they are aggressively expanding their solar and wind capacity, the immediate, desperate need for steady, reliable baseload power forces them to burn massive amounts of coal. Baseload power is the minimum amount of electricity needed to keep society functioning. Think of baseload power like the heavy concrete foundation of a skyscraper. You can build fancy glass windows and green roofs on top, which represent wind and solar. But if that concrete foundation cracks, the whole building comes down. Coal and natural gas provide that unshakable foundation. So, even as the world talks about moving away from fossil fuels, the physical reality of keeping billions of people alive during extreme weather events guarantees that traditional dirty energy will remain incredibly valuable for the foreseeable future. However, there is a dark cloud hovering over all of this economic activity, and it comes from the United States Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is basically the central bank of the world. They control the cost of money by raising or lowering interest rates. Right now, the Fed is maintaining a highly hawkish stance. What does hawkish mean? Imagine you are driving a car down a steep hill, and the car is starting to go dangerously fast. The car represents economic inflation, where prices are rising too quickly. A hawkish banker is someone who aggressively slams on the brakes to slow the car down, even if it makes the passengers feel sick. They slam on the brakes by raising interest rates. When interest rates are high, it becomes much more expensive for regular people to get a mortgage for a house or for a business to get a loan to build a new factory. If businesses cannot borrow money cheaply, they stop expanding. They buy fewer materials. They hire fewer people. We are seeing proof of this slowdown in economic indicators, like the ISM non-manufacturing PMI. Do not let that complicated name scare you. Let us break it down with a simple analogy. Imagine you are standing outside a huge restaurant, trying to guess how many people will eat there tonight. Instead of counting the customers, you sneak around to the back alley and look at how many boxes of raw meat and vegetables the restaurant manager is ordering from the delivery trucks. If the manager is ordering double the food, you know they expect a huge crowd. If they cut their order in half, you know business is bad. The Purchasing Managers Index is essentially a survey of all the managers ordering supplies for factories and service businesses across the country. A score above 50 means they are buying more things, and the economy is growing. A score below 50 means they are buying fewer things, and the economy is shrinking. Right now, that number is dipping below 50. This means the broader economy is slowing down. If the economy slows down, factories produce less, trucks drive fewer miles, and overall energy demand drops. This creates a massive paradox. We have geopolitical wars artificially pushing oil prices up, while the central banks are actively trying to crush the economy, which should pull oil prices down. It is a violent collision of economic forces. But while the Western world is agonizing over interest rates and oil pipelines, China is quietly executing the greatest economic pivot in human history. We are witnessing an absolute explosion in Chinese clean technology exports. Solar panels, electric vehicles, and high-capacity lithium-ion batteries are flooding the global market at an unprecedented rate. This is not happening by accident. This is the result of decades of intense, focused government strategy. To understand the magnitude of what China is doing, we have to look at the history of the solar panel. The first practical silicon solar cell was actually invented in the United States at Bell Labs way back in 1954. For decades, solar power was an incredibly expensive niche technology, used mostly for space satellites. Then, in the early 2000s, the country of Germany decided they wanted to transition to green energy. They created massive financial subsidies to encourage people to buy solar panels. This created a huge new market, but it was China that looked at this emerging market and decided to completely dominate it. The Chinese government poured billions of dollars of state money into building massive, sprawling megafactories. They wanted to achieve extreme economies of scale. What is an economy of scale? Imagine you decide to bake a single loaf of bread in your home kitchen. You have to buy a small bag of flour, heat up your entire oven, and spend an hour mixing the dough. That one loaf of bread might cost you $5 in materials and energy. Now imagine you build a giant factory with conveyor belts and industrial ovens the size of a school bus, and you buy flour by the trainload. Suddenly, you can bake 10,000 loaves of bread an hour, and each loaf only costs you 10 cents to make. That is exactly what China did with solar panels and electric vehicle batteries. By building at a scale the world had never seen before, they drove the cost of manufacturing down to the floor. Today, they produce these green technologies so cheaply and so efficiently that Western companies simply cannot compete on price alone. This is terrifying for traditional energy investors, because it introduces the concept of stranded assets. A stranded asset is something you bought for a lot of money, expecting it to generate profit for decades, but sudden technological changes make it completely worthless overnight. Think about the people who bought blockbuster video franchise stores right before Netflix started streaming movies over the internet. They owned a physical building full of plastic tapes that nobody wanted anymore. That is a stranded asset. Oil companies are terrified that their multi-billion-dollar offshore drilling rigs and massive underground pipelines will become the blockbusters of the 21st century. If electric vehicles become cheaper to buy and cheaper to operate than gas-powered cars, the demand for oil will permanently collapse. So how do the smartest minds in finance, the institutional titans, navigate a world where oil is highly profitable today, but might be worthless tomorrow? First, they understand market psychology. They understand the difference between herd behavior and contrarian investing. Herd behavior is an emotional panic. Imagine a massive herd of wild horses grazing in a canyon. One horse gets spooked by a snake and starts running. Suddenly, the horse next to it starts running just because its neighbor is running. Within seconds, the entire herd is in a blind, terrified stampede, trampling everything in their path. even though only one horse actually saw the danger. Human investors do the exact same thing. When the news flashes a headline about a drone strike in the Middle East, amateur investors panic. They instantly buy oil stocks at the absolute highest price out of pure fear. Then, a week later, when the tension cools down, the price crashes, and they lose their life savings. They are acting entirely on emotion. The smart money, the contrarian investor, acts like an eagle, sitting high up on a cliff, quietly watching the horses stampede below. They do not react to the daily news cycle. They look at the structural long-term trends. They know that the energy market is permanently bifurcated. Bifurcated just means split into two distinct parts. To survive a bifurcated market, institutions use something called a barbell strategy. Imagine a heavy metal barbell at a gym. All the heavy weights are loaded onto the two extreme opposite ends of the bar, and there is nothing but empty space in the middle. In an investment portfolio, this means completely avoiding the middle ground. On one end of the barbell, you put your money into highly profitable traditional fossil fuel companies. These companies are generating massive amounts of cash right now because the geopolitical risk premium is keeping oil prices high. This side of the barbell pays your bills today. On the exact opposite end of the barbell, you invest in the pure future. You buy into the companies building global clean energy infrastructure, advanced battery storage, and next-generation electrical grids. These companies might be volatile today, but they represent the unstoppable future of human civilization. By holding both extremes, you protect yourself from the sudden shock of an oil crisis while guaranteeing you do not miss out on the green revolution. But even with a barbell strategy, timing the market is impossible. You cannot predict when a war will start or when a new technology will be invented. That is why the ultimate survival mechanic is dollar cost averaging. Dollar cost averaging is a concept that sounds complex, but is beautifully simple. Imagine you want to buy a year's worth of groceries. You could try to guess which day of the year food prices will be the absolute cheapest. Walk into the store with $10,000 and buy everything at once. But if you guess wrong and you buy on a day when prices are secretly at a record high, you ruin yourself financially. Instead, dollar cost averaging means you take that $10,000, divide it by 52 weeks, and you just buy a small amount of groceries every single Friday, no matter what the price is on that specific day. Sometimes you will buy when prices are high. Sometimes you will buy when prices are low. Over the long run, your purchase price averages out, completely removing the danger of terrible timing. When investing in the chaotic energy sector, consistency is your greatest shield. You never bet your entire life savings on a single geopolitical event. You steadily accumulate shares in both the dying giants of the past and the rising titans of the future. The energy landscape is a living, breathing organism. It is a pure reflection of humanity's evolving needs, our technological genius, and our darkest conflicts. The shift from fire to coal to oil, and now to the limitless power of the sun, is the greatest story of human progress. You must embrace this incredible transition, but you absolutely cannot ignore the brutal, profitable realities of the present. We couldn't fit all the deep dive details and practical strategies into this video.